Javonte Kittenton. Kittenton entered the NBA in 2007 as a first-round draft pick by the Lakers after a standout year at Georgia Tech. His future looked bright. Then Kittenton was traded twice in 2 years. He played for the Lakers, Memphis Grizzlies, and Washington Wizards during his NBA career, which lasted from 2007 to 2010. His professional basketball career was first derailed by a major incident in December 2009 while playing for the Washington Wizards. The trouble began with a gambling dispute between Kittenton and teammate Gilbert Arenas during a card game on the team plane. Arenas had won $1,100 from Kittenton and taunted him by saying he should fight or do whatever you have to do to get your money back. Both players then told each other, "I play with guns," during the argument that continued on the shuttle van from the team plane. The next day in December 2009, Arenas brought 4 guns into the Washington Wizards locker room and dared Kittenton to shoot him. In response, Kittenton pulled out a loaded gun and pointed it directly at Arenas, causing teammates to take cover. The rest of the team ran and left Arenas and Kittenton alone in the locker room during this dangerous confrontation. Both players were suspended from the NBA for the remainder of the 2009-2010 season. Arenas was sentenced to 30 days in a halfway house, while Kittenton received probation. The incident, later known as Gungate, and became national news. From that moment, his career was unofficially over. But his story was far from finished. After fading from basketball, Kittenton returned to Atlanta and became entangled with gang activities. On August 19, 2011, Kittenton was involved in a drive-by shooting in Atlanta that killed Julian Jones, a 22-year-old mother of 4, with a bullet that severed her femoral artery. She bled to death on the street near her home. According to prosecutors, Kittenton was aiming at a man who had allegedly robbed him a few days earlier, but instead struck and killed Jones. Kittenton was charged with murder on August 26, 2011, and was arrested after a manhunt. He was alleged to be a gang member at the time of the shooting. The case took several years to resolve, with Kittenton initially facing a potential life sentence. On April 29, 2015, Kittenton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison and 17 years of probation as part of his plea agreement. His cousin, Douglas Gamble, was also sentenced in connection with the case. However, Kittenton's sentence was later modified by a Fulton County judge. His original 23-year sentence was reduced to a 20-year sentence on the voluntary manslaughter charge, with 10 years served in confinement and the remaining 10 years to be served on probation. He was released from prison on April 21, 2023, after serving approximately 11 years behind bars. Upon his release, Kittenton was placed on 5 years of intensive probation with strict conditions. He was required to wear a monitoring device, observe a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. curfew, and perform 7,200 hours of community service over 10 years. Leonel MarQuetti. MarQuetti was once a highly regarded basketball talent. Standing 6'8", he played college ball at USC before transferring to Hampton University. In 1981, he was selected in the NBA draft by the San Antonio Spurs, but he never played a game in the league. Despite falling short of an NBA career, MarQuetti was still remembered in basketball circles as a physically gifted athlete with potential. But nearly 3 decades later, in March 2010, the man once known for power on the court would become infamous for a violent and calculated act of revenge. The crime occurred in Plant City, Florida, where MarQuetti had been in an on-again, off-again relationship with his ex Siglinda Sperber. After they split, she began receiving help around her property from Michael Hurlbut, a 41-year-old handyman with allegedly no romantic ties to her. But that didn't matter to MarQuetti. He believed Hurlbut was romantically involved with Sperber, and jealousy began to consume him. On March 25, 2010, MarQuetti arrived at his ex-home armed with a .38 caliber revolver. According to prosecutors, he confronted Hurlbut on the property without warning. The argument was short. Witnesses said MarQuetti barely spoke before pulling the gun and firing 4 rounds at close range, hitting Hurlbut multiple times in the chest and torso. Hurlbut collapsed immediately. But instead of fleeing, MarQuetti allegedly turned the gun on his former girlfriend, ordering her inside the house and holding her against her will for several minutes. The standoff ended when MarQuetti finally released her and fled the scene. Police captured him shortly after and charged him with first-degree premeditated murder, aggravated battery, and false imprisonment. At trial, prosecutors detailed how MarQuetti had planned the attack. carrying the weapon and showing up uninvited. The shooting, they argued, was an act of cold-blooded vengeance, not heat-of-the-moment rage. In May 2011, MarQuetti was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional years for the other charges. During sentencing, the victim's family described MarQuetti's actions as cowardly, cruel, and unforgivable. Charles Smith. Smith was once the pride of Georgetown basketball, a standout point guard who played with speed, control, and leadership. In his senior year, he was named Big East Player of the Year, averaging nearly 19 points per game and leading the Hoyas to the Elite Eight. He also represented Team USA in the 1988 Olympics, winning a bronze medal as part of the last squad before NBA players were allowed to compete. Despite his college accolades, Smith went undrafted in 1989 due to concerns about his size and inconsistent shooting. Still, the Boston Celtics gave him a chance. Smith signed as an undrafted free agent and played in 60 games over 2 seasons. His time in the NBA was limited by injuries, including a shoulder dislocation, and he posted modest numbers, just under 3 points and 2 assists per game. In March 1991, he signed a second 10-day contract with the Celtics, hoping to secure a permanent role. But just days later, everything unraveled. On the night of March 22, 1991, Smith was driving a Dodge Caravan through Boston at around 1:45 a.m., with his former Georgetown roommate, Benjamin Guillory, in the passenger seat, as they passed through an intersection on Commonwealth Avenue. The van struck 2 Boston University students, a 21-year-old Ant Tren and a 20-year-old Michelle Dartley, who were crossing the street. Witnesses claimed the van ran a red light, hit the pedestrians, spun briefly, slowed down, and then sped away. A nearby taxi driver followed the van and alerted police. Smith was pulled over about a mile from the scene. The vehicle showed front-end damage, and although he cooperated with officers, his blood alcohol level registered at .06, below the legal limit at the time. Prosecutors argued Smith was impaired and pointed to witness testimony and his decision to flee as further evidence. Guillory testified that Smith had consumed at least 2 beers earlier that evening. Smith was charged with 2 counts each of vehicular homicide, manslaughter, leaving the scene, reckless operation, and failure to yield. He was released on a $100,000 personal recognizance bond and quietly parted ways with the Celtics, who let his contract expire without public comment. His trial concluded nearly a year later, in March 1992. The prosecution called his flight from the scene obscene and disgusting, while the defense argued it was a tragic accident and that Smith was a man of good character. Testimony came from respected figures like Georgetown coach John Thompson and Celtics executive Dave Gavitt. Smith did not testify but addressed the victims' families at sentencing, apologizing in a subdued voice. He was convicted of 2 counts of vehicular homicide and 2 counts of leaving the scene, but acquitted of the more serious manslaughter charges. The judge sentenced him to 4.5 years in prison. Smith served 28 months before being released in July 1994. Remarkably, he returned to basketball after prison. He played in the CBA, earning All-Star honors with the Hartford Hellcats in 1996 and leading the league in assists. He also continued his career overseas in Serbia, Greece, Spain, Puerto Rico, Argentina, Belgium, and Italy. His NBA return was brief, just 13 games with the Minnesota Timberwolves during the 1994-95 season. But Smith's troubles didn't end there. In October 2010, he was shot twice in the chest at his home in Maryland. He survived the attack after undergoing emergency surgery. During the investigation, police discovered large quantities of cocaine and evidence of gambling operations in the house. However, no charges were filed, and no suspect was identified in the shooting. Charles Smith's life has been a long, complex arc, from collegiate star and Olympian to convicted felon and survivor of a violent shooting, marked by both athletic resilience and tragic decisions. Chance Comanche was once considered a promising basketball prospect. A 6'10" center out of Los Angeles. He played college ball at Arizona before going undrafted in 2017. Over the next few years, he bounced around in minor leagues, spending time in the NBA G League and signing short-term contracts overseas. By 2023, Comanche was playing with the Stockton Kings, the Sacramento Kings G League affiliate. He was chasing his dream of making it to the NBA, and by all outward appearances, he was close. But what no one saw coming was the darkness underneath. Approximately a year and a half before the incident, Comanche met a woman named Marina Rogers on a dating app. He was also involved with a 19-year-old woman named Sakari Harnden, who he used to date. At the end of November 2023, Comanche and Harnden began planning the murder of Morena Rogers. The pair were unable to get someone else to help with the murder, so they decided to carry out the murder themselves. They planned to execute this murder while Comanche was in Las Vegas for a basketball game with the Stockton Kings. On December 5, 2023, Rogers was last seen with friends and had arranged to meet with Harnden and Comanche. In the early morning hours of December 6, 2023, the murder took place. 23-year-old Morena Rogers was found strangled in a roadside ditch in a Henderson neighborhood. According to court records, Comanche allegedly admitted to fatally strangling the woman. Authorities say it was a calculated crime. Allegedly, the two ladies had an altercation over a stolen Rolex, which led to the setup. Comanche was charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and kidnapping. He was denied bail. His arrest shocked the basketball world. Just days before, he had played in a G League game. Teammates and coaches were stunned. There had been no public warning signs. Keith Appling. Appling was once a standout point guard with national attention. A McDonald's All-American in high school, he went on to star at Michigan State University from 2010 to 2014. Known for his speed and toughness, Appling led the Spartans deep into NCAA tournaments and left college as one of the top players in school history. Though undrafted in 2014, he briefly reached the NBA, signing short-term contracts and appearing in a few games with the Orlando Magic. But after basketball, Appling's life began to spiral. Following his final stint in the G League in 2016, Appling's name started appearing in police reports. In 2017, he was sentenced to 1 year in jail for carrying a concealed weapon and resisting arrest. Over the next few years, he continued to face legal issues, including weapons and drug-related charges. The turning point came on May 22, 2021. That night, Appling was involved in a confrontation with 66-year-old Clyde Edmonds, a relative of his girlfriend, in Detroit, Michigan. According to prosecutors, the verbal argument over a handgun turned physical, and Appling fired multiple shots at Edmonds. Edmonds was rushed to a nearby hospital but was pronounced dead from his injuries. A gun was recovered from the scene, and Appling allegedly fled with his girlfriend, Natalie Brooks Bannister, who was later charged in connection with the case. On February 13, 2023, just as jury selection was set to begin for his trial, the 31-year-old Appling accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and a felony firearm charge. The plea agreement called for a sentence of 18 to 40 years in prison. He was sentenced on March 3, 2023. But before his sentencing, Appling attempted to withdraw his guilty plea, but the judge denied his request. Jason Williams. Williams was a former NBA All-Star center best known for his time with the New Jersey Nets in the 1990s. Standing 6'10" and weighing over 240 pounds, Williams was a physically dominant rebounder and shot blocker. He was selected 21st overall in the 1990 NBA draft and had a solid career that spanned 9 seasons. Off the court, Williams was charismatic and outspoken. After retiring from basketball, he worked as a television analyst and remained active in charity work. But beneath the public image, Williams struggled with anger issues and reckless behavior problems that would eventually lead to tragedy. On February 14, 2002, inside his New Jersey mansion, Jason Williams fatally shot Kostas Gus Christofi, a limousine driver hired to shuttle guests to and from a charity event. According to court records, the shooting occurred during a gathering at Williams' home. Witnesses said Williams was drinking heavily, showing off his shotgun and mishandling the weapon. Christofi was shot in the chest at close range and died almost instantly. What followed was a series of attempts to cover up the shooting. Williams allegedly tried to make it look like a suicide, telling others to lie to the police and tampering with the crime scene. He was initially charged with manslaughter in 2002, but legal proceedings dragged on for years due to mistrials and procedural delays. It wasn't until 2004 that he was convicted on 4 counts related to the cover-up. However, the jury deadlocked on the manslaughter charge. In January 2010, Williams finally pleaded guilty to aggravated assault in the shooting death of Christofi. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and served 18 months before being released in 2012. The relatively short sentence sparked public criticism, especially considering the efforts to obstruct justice after the incident. Richie Adams. Adams. Adams was a towering force at UNLV, nicknamed the Animal for his rebounding and shot-blocking prowess. He was twice named Pacific Coast Athletic Association Player of the Year and looked set to reach the NBA. The Washington Bullets even drafted him in 1985, but he never played a game. His basketball career was derailed by a pattern of criminal behavior that began early in his life. One day after being drafted by the Bullets, Adams was arrested for car theft in the Bronx, which immediately ended his professional basketball prospects. After college, Adams fell into street life in the Bronx. He was arrested multiple times for auto theft, armed robbery, purse snatching, and struggled with cocaine addiction. He spent years in prison before being paroled in 1994. Returning to his old neighborhood, nothing about his behavior improved. He quickly fell back into crime. In October 1996, 15-year-old Norma Rodriguez was brutally beaten to death in the hallway of a housing project, just one floor above where Adams lived. Investigators found a bloodied size 13.5 sneaker print, matching Adams's left shoe. The medical examiner testified she died from repeated stomping injuries to her head and chest. Adams was arrested 8 days later and charged with manslaughter. At trial, prosecutors argued Rodriguez rejected his advances, triggering his violent attack. Witness accounts and forensic evidence linked him conclusively to the scene. In 1998, he was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Adams's downfall was a tragic spiral, from college standout to convicted killer. Beneath the promise lay addiction and violence that erupted in a brutal crime. Michael Niles. Niles, a 6'6" forward from Los Angeles, played college basketball at Cal State Fullerton before being selected by the Philadelphia 76ers in the 1979 NBA Draft. Though he never played for Philly, he eventually appeared in 44 games for the Phoenix Suns during the 1980-81 season. He wasn't a star, but he made it just long enough to be called a pro. But that brief brush with success faded quickly, and what followed was something darker, much darker. By the early 1980s, Niles had left professional basketball and was living in Corona, California with his wife, Sonia Niles, and their child. Financial strain and personal conflicts began to surface. Michael had taken out a $100,000 life insurance policy on Sonia, and soon after, he made a chilling decision. She was worth more dead than alive. Rather than commit the act himself, Niles enlisted a friend, Noel Jackson, to carry out the murder. In exchange for $5,000, Jackson agreed to execute the plan. On the night of December 13, 1984, while Sonia was home alone with her young daughter nearby, Jackson entered the house with a sawed-off shotgun. According to court documents, he pressed the barrel against the back of her head and pulled the trigger. The blast killed her instantly, leaving a gruesome scene. It was an execution, cold, deliberate, and without hesitation. Jackson fled the scene in a red car, where a neighbor reportedly saw two men leaving the property quickly. That tip would later help identify both Jackson and Niles. Both men were arrested and tried separately. During Niles' trial, prosecutors described the killing as murder for profit, premeditated, calculated, and cowardly. The most damning evidence was not just physical, but circumstantial. The insurance policy, the cash payment, the timing, and the lack of remorse. In January 1989, a jury found Michael Niles guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His co-conspirator, Jackson, was also convicted and faced additional charges related to the firearm enhancement. Prosecutors even pursued the death penalty in his case due to the brutality of the act. Make sure to click the video on the screen to see more NBA stories.